Okay, it's finally happening. I'm reading the book for a book group. Thank you to everyone who has been waiting patiently and cheering this on, and anyone is welcome to join. This book is written by Diane Wolkstein and Samuel Kramer. They have a very cool story I'm excited to tell and share. And this is Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, her stories and hymns from Sumer. This is the first author, the oldest named author in the world. And this from around 4,000 to 5,000 BC. The dates keep changing and going back further, but we're going to go with what they give us. Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth. For my daughter, Rachel Cloudstone Zucker. Inanna's family tree. The stories in this cycle express an amalgamation of Sumerian and Akkadian religious and political beliefs that go back at least 1,000 years before Sumer was a unified political entity. During this third millennium BC, there were periodic attempts to unify the various city-states in Sumer and Akkad, and with the increasing political centralization came a concurrent movement to bring together many local gods and goddesses into one pantheon. In the cycle of Inanna, we encounter aspects of the earlier Sumerian Dumuzi, as well as the later, more politicized Akkadian Dumuzi. The Sumerian Dumuzi, who comes from the agricultural, more traditional area of southern Sumer, Eridu, which sounds like a Lord of the Rings setup, but it's not, guys. This is 5,000 years old, which emphasized order, which is called the me, sometimes pronounced may. I'm going to say me. Is characterized as the force of grain and as the priestly lover and attendant of the fertility goddess Inanna. The Akkadian Dumuzi, coming from the northern nomadic peoples who emphasized the arbitrary will and power of the gods, is characterized as the shepherd, the astral heavenly bull, and the king who has godlike powers. Inanna, too, by her epithet Queen of Heaven and Earth, subsumed the many local cults of the goddess and combined the earlier, more peaceful fertility goddess with the attributes of the more directing and directive goddess of love. Although in other legends and stories, the Sumerian divinities and heroes may have different relationships to each other, for the purpose of clarification, the family tree on the following page indicates the relationships of the divinities to each other within the context of these stories. Preface. Here is the map of Sumer at the time, which is modern-day Iraq. Preface by Samuel Noah Kramer. This book is a graphic example of an effective cooperation between two specialists working in contrasting yet complementary areas of humanistic research. A folklorist who has collected and recorded the tales, legends, and songs of modern contemporary societies, and a cuneiformist who has devoted his entire scholarly career to the restoration and translation of the written tales, legends, and songs of ancient Sumerians. The Sumerians' tales, legends, and songs are part of a vast literature inscribed on clay tablets and fragments scattered throughout museums the world over. Their contents, which date back to 2000 BC, are now in the process of being deciphered, translated, and interpreted by a small international group of dedicated scholars. Gradually, they are becoming available in one form or another to the world at large. Inscribed on these tablets and fragments, numbering some 5,000 to 6,000 in all, are hundreds of compositions, myths, epic tales, hymns, psalms, love songs, laments, essays, disputations, proverbs, fables that constitute a treasure house of comparative source material for the historian of literature and religion, for the biblical classical scholar, and, as this book demonstrates, for the folklorist and cultural anthropologist. The main goal of the selection presented here is to provide the reader with an authentic portrait of Sumer's most beloved and revered deity, the goddess Inanna. To compile this collection, I first combed the extant Sumerian literary documents, which I had deciphered and translated over the decades for the relevant compositions on Inanna. Then, with the help of the most recent contributions by fellow Sumerologists, I brought the translations up to date. Finally, I turned the stories over to Diane Wolkstein, who proceeded to arrange, combine, and mold their raw contents in a way that would make them alive and meaningful to modern readers. As a gifted storyteller and professional folklorist, Diane Wolkstein performed her delicate task with originality, ingenuity, and sensitivity. She eliminated cluttering repetitions, added explanatory words and lines when advised, restored a broken passage when possible, and skillfully wove the text of numerous related poems into a unifying whole. Diane Wolkstein has succeeded in recreating a significant group of rather esoteric tales and songs long erased from the memory of man, in a form that is at once imaginative and evocative, attractive, and engaging. I'm going to go back and see when this book was published, because this was published in 1983. And yeah, so since then, I think that we have found that these stories and these cuneiform tablets are older than they stated here at 2000 BC. I think they're more around anywhere from 2000 BC to 5000 BC. Introduction by Diane Wolkstein. Inanna was a birthday gift and more. In the spring of 1979, I'd been asked by Priscilla Moulton to present a program at Simmons College in Boston for the following November. As the date fell on the week of my birthday and the program was open to my choosing, I decided that this must be the occasion I had been waiting for, and for years wanted to tell the story of the moon goddess Diana. Not only am I her namesake, but in her cyclical aspect, the moon goddess is an identifying symbol for women. And all of us, both men and women, have long needed a grand story of a woman, an inspiration, guide, and model for ourselves, as well as for our children. To my surprise, 4 months of research on the moon goddesses of the world turned up only scattered bits. The most complete tale of the goddess is that of Demeter, but the story revolves around the mother-daughter aspect of the goddess, and I wanted to tell a story of the goddess in all of her aspects. Where was she to be found? To look at the statues of the goddess in museums and to read of her impact in books of mythology and religion was only a beginning. As a storyteller, in order to know her, I had to hear her speak. I had to find the goddess in relationship with others. In order to know her, I had to find her text. I went through the world's anthologies in search of names of the moon goddesses: Ishtar, Mari, Diana, Isis, Hecate, Pasiphae, Selene, Bridget, Cybele, the Shekinah, Lilith, Persephone, and Inanna. I sought her by name and at last found the mention of her and her stories in Samuel Noah Kramer's most recent book, From the Poetry of Sumer. In this book, Kramer describes the goddess of the first civilization from which we have texts. Female deities were worshipped and adored all through Sumerian history, but the goddess who outweighed, overshadowed, outlasted them all was a deity known to the Sumerians by the name of Inanna, Queen of Heaven, and to the Semites who lived in Sumer by the name of Ishtar. Inanna played a greater role in myth, epic, and hymn than any other deity, male or female. In Kramer's The Sacred Marriage Rite, I found the various love poems of the young earthly Inanna, the story of mature Inanna's descent into the underworld. I read Inanna's descent again and again. I was drawn to the story of the woman who gave up at 7 successive gates all she had accomplished in life until she was stripped naked with nothing remaining but her will to be reborn. Although fragmented, the story of Inanna, as I began to perceive, is followed the same pattern as the archetypal moon goddess. The young woman who is courted, the ripe woman who enjoys her feminine powers and generously offers her bounty, and the mature woman who meets death in the underworld. In The White Goddess, Robert Graves conjectures on the heavenly aspects of the triple goddess. As the sky goddess, she was the moon. As the new moon or spring, she was the girl. As the full moon or summer, she was woman. As the old moon or winter, she was the hag. In Sumerian, Inanna's name quite literally means Queen of Heaven, and she was both called the first daughter of the moon and the morning and evening star, the planet of Venus. In addition, in Sumerian mythology, she was known as the Queen of Heaven and Earth and was responsible for the growth of plants and animals and fertility in humankind. Then, because of her journey to the underworld, she took on the powers and mysteries of death and rebirth, emerging not only as a sky or moon goddess, but as the goddess who rules over the sky, the earth, and the underworld. Here was the goddess in all of her aspects. Here was my story. But as I prepared the story for the presentation, piecing together the different sections, there were many gaps and question marks in the texts, often at the most crucial moments, and I wondered what many of the words meant, literally. My friend Susan Burkolt's long Sumeria file suggested I telephone the source, Samuel Noah Kramer, who had deciphered the text. "So, you love Inanna," Kramer said, answering the telephone himself. "Well, then come and see me." He was giving a Jain lecture on Inanna in 2 days' time at the Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, and why didn't I come then? I arrived eager and full of questions. In the first line of the Descent of Inanna, from the great above, she set her mind to the great below. What exactly does mind mean? Ear, Kramer said. Ear? Yes, the word for ear and wisdom in Sumerian are the same, but mind is what is meant. But I could say ear? Well, you could. It is opened her ear or set her ear, ? Set her ear, like a donkey that sets its ear at a particular sound. As Kramer spoke, a shiver ran through me. When taken literally, the text itself announces the story's direction. From the great above, the goddess opened or set her receptor for wisdom to the great below. While these thoughts were darting around in my mind, Kramer looked at the shaping I had done of his text and said that he thought I could find a publisher there might be possibility for collaborating on a joint publication. I had read the story of Inanna and the Huluppu tree and asked Kramer if there were other stories about Inanna that were intact. He mentioned Inanna and Enki, the transfer of the arts and civilization from Eridu to Eric, but said it had not been completely translated into English. In November in 1979, I told the courtship and the descent of Inanna at Simmons College to an astonished and awestruck audience. When I told Kramer about it, he insisted that people were responding to me, but I assured him it was the Inanna who had captivated him for 50 years, who was now captivating them as well. By February 1980, we had an eager and supportive publisher. In March, Kramer sent a translation of The Me. Then a month later, when Kramer showed me Reisman's scholarly translations of the hymns, I suddenly understood that with the rebirth of the goddess into the sky, the text formed one story. The life story of the goddess, from her adolescence to her completed womanhood and godship. In the beginning, the work of trying to find the appropriate written form for the stories of Inanna. I tried prose, the form I knew best from storytelling, but I found myself continually returning to verse. After 6 months of experimenting with different forms for the Huluppu tree, it seemed there was one invisible, irreducible essence buried in each Sumerian line. Only by keeping the actual Sumerian verse line could I hope to express the mystery and power that lay within. For over 2 years, I worked on the text that Kramer gave me. On my visits to Kramer, I asked him, what does this word mean, this sentence? Could he express it in a different English word? What did it mean literally in Sumerian? Sometimes he could answer my questions. Other times he'd throw up his hands and say, no matter how many times you ask me the same question, I still don't know. With Kramer's consent, I turned to the writings of Thorkild Jacobsen for alternative ideas and words. I consulted the translations of Kramer's students for further possibilities on puzzling sections. I condensed sections, added and edited, always with the idea of the story in mind. During the first year, I dreamed of being in an enormous green meadow, having the task of cleaning the meadow blade by blade. In thinking about the book, I felt it was essential to use the art of Sumer and the surrounding areas to illustrate the text. Elizabeth Williams Forte offered me expert and encouraging guidance both in finding and in selecting the appropriate works of art. Together, we spent many wonderful hours discussing and choosing the cylinder seals and terracotta sculptures that seemed best to express the story's moods and meanings. After the first 9 months of reading everything I could find on Sumerian literature, culture, and history, speaking with Kramer and working and reworking each line, I decided I had to bring the story once again to the audience. I arranged to tell the cycle of Inanna at Robert Bly's Mother Goddess Conference in Maine in June 1980. But the thought of telling the stories to other people propelled me to rework the text again. In fact, each time I have told Inanna, I have reworked the text as I realize the expressions such as days of yore or I, the maid, would immediately deaden the receptivity of the audience. Further changes came to the manuscript from the telling. Audiences had difficulty keeping more than one foreign name in their minds at the same time, following the flow of the story. For this reason, I decided to use English epithets to accompany the names of the characters as they appear. I also tried to minimize the use of Sumerian place names. Still, I kept such Sumerian words as Kur, Mi, Sakal, and Abzu, for they are metaphysical concepts that seem to be intrinsic to Sumerian thought, and in time I hope they may come to enrich our English thought and language. My aim has been to keep as close as possible to the power, wonder, and mystery embedded in the Sumerian texts, simultaneously render the stories both accessible and compelling. For the latter reason, I have eliminated much of the repetition. For the former reason, I have retained as much of the repetition in Sumerian grammatical structure as the flow of the story would allow. For example, the three-part progressing parallelism, as in he, father, Enki. Wherever there is a break in the text, I use ellipses. When a certain section seems to demand clarification, often because there is a break at a crucial point, parentheses have been used to indicate that those are my own words. Here then is the cycle of Inanna. In the Huluppu tree, she appears to us as a young woman in search of her womanhood. In Inanna and the god of wisdom, she achieves her queenship. In the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi, she chooses the shepherd Dumuzi as her lover, her husband, and the king of Sumer. In the descent of Inanna, Inanna leaves for the underworld and is allowed to return from the great below only on the condition that she chooses a substitute. In the last section of the cycle, 7 hymns to Inanna, Inanna is greeted and loved in her many aspects. The world's first love story, 2,000 years older than the Bible, tender, erotic, shocking, and compassionate, is more than the momentary entertainment. It is a sacred story that has the intention of bringing its audience to a new spiritual place. With Inanna, we enter the place of exploration, the place where not all energies have been tamed or ordered. Inanna's scribe, Samuel Noah Kramer, gave me her words. I have sung them as best as I can, and now we pass them on to you. Inanna's Stories and Hymns. The Huluppu tree. I just want to say quickly that these were, because not few people could write in cuneiform back then, these were sung. So these were hymns because they were passed down in oral tradition, like most stories during indigenous times. And so there's a lot of repetition because these were sung. In the first days, in the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years. In the first days when everything needed was brought into being, in the first days when everything needed was properly nourished, when bread was baked in the shrines of the land, and bread was tasted in the homes of the land, when heaven had moved away from earth, and earth had separated from heaven, and the name of man was fixed, when the sky god, On, had carried off the heavens, and the air god, Enlil, had carried off the earth, when the queen of the great below, Ereshkigal, was given the underworld for her domain. He set sail. The father set sail. Enki, the god of wisdom, set sail for the underworld. Small windstones were tossed up against him. Large hailstones were hurled up against him. Like onrushing turtles, they charged the keel of Enki's boat. The waters of the sea devoured the bow of his boat like wolves. The waters of the sea struck the stern of his boat like lions. At that time, a single tree was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The tree was nurtured by the waters of the Euphrates. The whirling south wind arose, pulling up its roots and ripping up its branches, until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. A woman who walked in fear of the word of the sky god, On, who walked in fear of the word of the air god, Enlil, plucked the tree from the river and spoke, I shall bring this to Uruk. I shall plant this tree in my holy garden. Inanna cared for the tree with her hand. She settled the earth around the tree with her foot. She wondered, How long will it be until I have a shining throne to sit upon? How long will it be until I have a shining bed to lie upon? The years passed, 5 years, then 10 years. The tree grew thick, but its bark did not split. Then a serpent, who could not be charmed, made its nest in the roots of the Huluppu tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark-maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. The young woman who loved to laugh wept. How Inanna wept! Yet they would not leave her tree. As the birds began to sing in the coming of the dawn, the sun god Utu left his royal bedchamber. Inanna called to her brother Utu, saying, "O Utu, in the days when the fates were decreed, the abundance overflowed in the land, and the sky god took the heavens, and the air god took the earth, and Ereshkigal was given the great below for her domain. The god of wisdom, Father Enki, set sail for the underworld, and the underworld rose up and attacked him. At that time, a single tree, a Huluppu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The south wind pulled at its roots and ripped at its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. I plucked the tree from the river. I brought it to my holy garden. I tended the tree, waiting for my shining throne and bed. Then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark-maid Lilith set her home in the trunk. I wept, how I wept, yet they would not leave my tree. Utu, the valiant warrior, Utu would not help his sister Inanna. As the birds began to sing of the coming of the second dawn, Inanna called to her brother Gilgamesh, saying, "O Gilgamesh, in the days when the fates were decreed, when abundance overflowed in Sumer, when the sky god had taken the heavens and the air god had taken the earth, when Ereshkigal was given the great below for her domain, the god of wisdom, Father Enki, had set sail for the underworld. And the underworld rose up and attacked him. At that time, a single tree, a Huluppu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The south wind pulled at its roots and ripped at its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. I plucked the tree from the river. I brought it to my holy garden. I tended the tree, waiting for my shining throne and bed. When a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the tree, and the Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark-maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. I wept, how I wept, yet they would not leave my tree. Gilgamesh, the valiant warrior Gilgamesh, the hero of Uruk, stood by Inanna. Gilgamesh fastened his armor of 50 minas around his chest. The 50 minas weighed as little to him as 50 feathers. He lifted his bronze axe, the axe of the road, weighing 7 talents and 7 minas, to his shoulder. He enters Inanna's holy garden. Gilgamesh struck the serpent, who could not be charmed. The Anzu bird flew with his young to the mountains, and Lilith smashed her home and fled to the wild, uninhabited places. Gilgamesh then loosened the roots of the Huluppu tree, and the sons of the city who accompanied him out of the branches. From the trunk of the tree, he carved a throne for his holy sister. From the trunk of the tree, Gilgamesh carved a bed for Inanna. From the roots of the tree, she fashioned a puku for her brother. From the crown of the tree, Inanna fashioned a miku for Gilgamesh, the hero of Uruk.